Hi, everyone. How are you all today?
Good. How are you?
Good. We are live and ready for this important conversation. I am so excited today to be able to talk with you. And I wanted to welcome everyone who has joined us for the Conversation for Good. On behalf of our president and CEO, Herman J. Felton Jr., on behalf of our co-executive director, Dr. Kiana White, I welcome you to this important conversation. My name is Dr. Bradley, and I serve as the COO here at Wiley College and also as one of the directors for this center for the Human Sweat Center for Social Good and Leadership. And I have the honor of today getting to host this important program and this important conversation. The Human Sweat Center is more than just a space, it's an idea. And our idea is that we will have a place where faculty, staff, and students can come together to think together, to consider together, and to organize. And organize around ideas that lead us to more social awareness, more social impact, and more social justice that at the end of the day lead to change in our society. I'm delighted to be in conversation with Ms. Tamron Hill, a 2018 graduate of Wiley College. And as we prepare for this important conversation, I invite Ms. Kennedy Maxey, who is a graduating senior, a sociology major from Shreveport, Louisiana, a future historian, who will share an introduction of our guest speaker today, Ms. Hill.
Hi, how is everyone doing today?
Great.
Hill was born in Hutchinson, Kansas. While attending Wiley College, she was an honors 2-point average. She studied sociology with a double minor in psychology. During her senior year, she was named Fulbright U.S. Scholar, being the first in Wiley's history. After graduating from Wiley College in 2018, she departed to degrees assistant at Athens College, where she was also the debate coach. She human rights at Humphreys School of Public Affairs, and I would like to say welcome home.
Thank you.
Uh, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I think we'd like to start, in the way that we kind of frame this is that we were going to have a conversation. And so the three of us will have a conversation about all the things that we know to be true in the world, as though we have known each other all our lives, but really with a focus on human rights, with a focus on social good, with a focus on leadership for change. And so what I'd like to do, if we don't mind, Ms. Hill, is if you would just share a little bit about yourself more than what we read, what we were able to be able to pull, what we know about you. And as Ms. Kennedy said, welcome home. We really are excited that you have taken the time to be able to sit with us. And I know you were super busy. So, again, thank you for taking the time. But we thought it was important to hear from you because of all the accomplishments that you have, but also because of the ways in which I believe that you've come to the work. And so we look forward to the inspirational words that you will provide for us today. But if you would take a few minutes and just share a little bit more about yourself. And if you don't mind, because I understand that you received a degree from the Humphrey School that that's framed that's a human rights degree, and just share a little bit more about that and yourself, and that will help us to kind of get going with this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank y'all for the lovely introduction and being here with you today. My name is Tamara Hill. Right now, I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. So Minneapolis, St. Paul area. We call it the Twin Cities. I moved up here to go to graduate school, so I went to the Humphrey School, which is at the University of Minnesota. I got my Master of Human Rights Policy degree from the Humphrey School. So to frame that, what it is a public policy degree, very similar to a Master of Public Policy or a Master of Public Affairs. But mine is public policy that's concentrated through a human rights lens and global human rights issues. My concentration while I was at the Humphrey School was international conflict and securities and leadership. So that concentration is really about the concept of what we call human security. Human security is about keeping people safe and valuing people first when we think of domestic or foreign policy. So instead of putting, the cost first or the economics first or worrying about government stability or anything else, we think of people first and value keeping people safe before we do anything else. And yeah, before I moved up here, I had come into policy in a bunch of different kind of ways, I would say. I had been somewhat of a community organizer when I was in high school. I helped organize, um, there. I guess at the time they were poetry slams to bring like BIPOC kids from the community together. I created a poetry club at my high school. We did like poetry reading nights at a local coffee shop as a way for particularly Black women at our school to have their voices heard and to just have a creative outlet. Then, yeah, I organized a lot in specific policy while I was at Wiley. I got the opportunity to work in policy like as a paid profession. And I also had done speech and policy debate for many years. By the time I left Wiley, I had done 7 years in debate. And so I was just kind of primed and ready to work in policy. And I always kind of thought, I'm going to have to labor for money to pay bills for the rest of my life. And so, well, hopefully not the rest of my life, but quite a bit of my life. And so if I have to labor, I might as well labor for my people. And that's how I ended up being in policy.
I love that, labor for my people. I've not heard it before, and that really just sums up this work and sums up what it means to be in community. So thank you for giving us that. I don't know if I have to sign it to you when I use it, but I'm giving you credit right now.
Yeah.
But I wonder, as you were kind of explaining your journey and particularly around the policy work, can you share a little bit more about at Wiley, what helped you to think about what you were doing, what you're now doing, or how you begin to prepare? And, what kinds of experiences did you have that helped to shape you to get to where you are?
Yeah, I definitely didn't come to Wiley thinking I was going to work in policy. At the time when I came to Wiley, I didn't even know working in policy was an option. I thought really the only ways to do that were to be a lawyer or to work in, or like be an elected politician. And I didn't want to do either of those things. And so when I came into Wiley, I actually was a secondary education major. And in the way that Wiley does, Wiley works in mysterious ways. And so my sophomore year, the secondary education department actually got shut down. And I had to switch majors. And I ended up in sociology because I thought, I'll get a transferable degree. I can still take the teaching exam and be a teacher if that's what I want. And over time, like I just kind of got further and further away from that. I won a fellowship at the United Negro College Fund, which it was the Walton Fellowship. It allowed me to move to New Orleans for a term, and I worked in policy in New Orleans. And then I also was a White House Fellow for the White House Initiative on HBCUs. I think it has a different name now, but then that's what it was.
Oh, that's the same name. It's pretty
The
much
same name. Okay. So I did that when I was at Wiley, and that was like, you basically just run like a policy campaign, a solo policy campaign. So you get direct experience organizing. Policy change is policy change, whether or not it's at the government level or just or at your college administration. You can change policies in your own home. It's policy change either way, right? And so it was those hands-on experiences that really guided me towards a career in policy. And after I finished, I had a lot of experience through the White House and that term in New Orleans that offered me like unique experiences that a lot of other people didn't have that were applying to graduate school and jobs, and also just like kind of set me on the right path. Like by the time I graduated Wiley, because of those 2 fellowships, I had over a year of direct policy experience. which not a lot of other people do. So I took that and I moved to Australia. I worked in policy there for a term, about 4 months, and then I moved to Greece.
So moving to Greece was part of your Fulbright.
Yes.
So we recognize that that's very prestigious, and not many people can say that they're Fulbrights. Can you share a little bit? Sorry.
That's okay.
So sorry. Can you share a little bit about what it looks like for you as a result of being a Fulbright? What did you learn? What did you
Yeah.
experience? What does it look like to go to a different country and spend time thinking with others?
So, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for recognizing the Fulbright and that it's prestigious. It is, and I'm very proud to have won one. It was a great experience. Like it it was one of the most powerful experiences I've done in my life at this point. Um, it was eye-opening and also like humbling and like made me grow a whole bunch in like good and stressful ways. And I think that that's important. Like a lot of people stay in their home country because they aren't welcome to the uncomfortable, not realizing that growth spurts are not comfortable. You have to be uncomfortable in order to grow. And putting yourself in a country, especially one where you don't speak or read the dominant language, is a very good way to do that. I became a better, more worldly, grounded person from living abroad. I didn't just like go to Greece to play and travel and whatnot. Like I did a lot of that and it was fun, but I lived there. I was a part of the community. I worked there. I studied the language, and had and learned the history. Like learned how to talk to the grocer like down the street at the mom and pop shop. I had a favorite ice cream place and a favorite coffee spot where they knew me by name and like so it very much was like a changing of my community and like a conscious and intentional effort to be a part of the community. I also worked there. And it's the Fulbright is the best way I think to get experience traveling, living abroad without having to like break your bank. You know, you're recognized as a Fulbright scholar for the rest of your life. So like every year I'm another year out of Wiley, out of graduation. There are things that'll fall off my resume, things that people won't talk about, but every year, regardless, like me being a Fulbright scholar matters. It gives you an opportunity to travel if you wouldn't have that before. So before I started Fulbright or got the Fulbright, I had never left the country. I didn't even have a passport. I got a passport when I found out I won the Fulbright. And in that year and a half ish that I was abroad, I went to like 15 countries, 2 continents. And so I went from being in a handful of states to being in over 2 handfuls of countries, which is like it's a great experience. And
How did you prepare for that? Because it's a, not if you weren't traveling before to now go onto this full experience, was there anything special that you did in that preparation?
yeah, I mean, one of the other reasons I recommend Fulbright, and this is different by country depending on which one you go to, but for Greece, like we all went together. So we were Americans in Greece, and there were 13 of us, and so we went as a cohort. So like getting to know like the people around you is great. Like being intentional and starting like your language lessons if you need them. So like I downloaded Duolingo and started taking like some Greek and learning some stuff. And I had Greek classes when I was over there, had those set up. I'm really just like preparing. It's hard. You need to mentally prepare yourself, but it's so hard to do if you have no foundation. But like you will go into these countries and you will land And sometimes you'll find people that speak English, and a lot of times you won't. The signs will not be in English. Like, you'll really have to, you know, be mindful of your surroundings, but also be mindful of the people there and realize that, like, you're in their home and what that really means. And yeah, just like my biggest preparation was just confronting fear. Like, I was really scared when I went to Greece, to be honest. Like, I grew up in a smallish city, and then I moved to Marshall when I was 18, which was smaller than where I was from. And so I never lived in a big city before. And then moving to Australia and Greece was the first time, and I was terrified and didn't really know what I was doing ever. And it was stressful in a lot of ways, but like, I grew a lot because I was open to leaning into that discomfort. And actually reminds me a lot of like a James Farmer Jr. quote, which is funny because it was a quote I always thought about when I was at Wiley. And it's, I'm going to like forget exactly what it is, but it's like, courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing what needs to be done despite the fear being there. And so that's really like,
you remember that. That's
yeah. And it's been a quote that like has really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a quote that I tell myself a lot because I do a lot of things that scare me, but in the end, the things that scare you are usually the things that change your life. So
I appreciate you sharing the Fulbright experience that you had, and really just encouraging persons who are watching this, particularly our students, current students, to consider applying or consider trying to do things that don't necessarily seem the norm for you, right? Or things that can be afraid, be fearful. And I always think going to college is a new experience, and I feel like if you can come to college, you can do anything. I think sometimes we don't kind of make that correlation. But you shared something, as you know, we've been kind of talking about the journey up until the work that you do, and because this conversation is about good and really kind of focusing in on the social good, social justice pieces and leadership, I'm curious about um, what you right now think are the things that keep you up at night around the local, national, global crisis. What keeps you up at night when you think about your commitment to social change, if you will?
yeah, it's a big question. It's kind of like a thing we talk about in my field, and I'm sure other people have this conversation too, but like, when you work in human rights, you want to work yourself out of a job. And if you can find a job, it means the world is still in shambles. so, um, so yeah, there are a lot of issues that deserve attention, and there are a lot of people who do different kinds of advocacy all around the world. The issues that I work on and the ones that I like worry about the most, I think they probably go hand in hand sometimes, because that's what I spend 40 to 50 hours a week working on. Globally, I worry very much about the re-rise of white nationalism and authoritarian rule that we're seeing happen in a lot of different countries around the world. Nationalism is dangerous regardless of where it is, and people always suffer on the back end of it. And there are a lot of genocides and wars happening right now that are the cause of nationalism. Climate change is a big worry. That's something that like I feel very sometimes powerless to do anything about, but know that it's happening and I'm nervous about it. I don't know if there will be. I'm advocating for a future where we have safer policing infrastructure and more human rights for people who are incarcerated. But because of climate change, I don't know if like that future even exists. So that's scary. And then like as a person, the stuff that I work on is those human security issues I mentioned, like policing and incarceration. That's what I do currently in Minnesota. I spend 40 to 55 hours a week thinking and working on these issues. And so if I'm going to be laying in bed at night thinking of anything, it'll probably be that. everywhere in the United States is in a policing crisis. We have to fix our public safety infrastructures because they're dangerous and they're not safe for communities or safe for law enforcement. We need a system that works better for everyone. But like living in Minnesota, and especially living in the Twin Cities, we have even before the murder of George Floyd, we had too many high-profile police-inflicted murders here, and it has not stopped. At least every month, I get a call or an update from a community member that another person has been killed by a police department, either in the Twin Cities or in Greater Minnesota. And our work is very very reactive and community responsive. And so when those things happen, it can kind of throw the week into a new whirlwind. So if I'm thinking about something, it's probably that.
As you were sharing, thank you for sharing that, because I recognize that was it is heavy and I know you were in the work, so to consistently think about it is heavy, but to share it is often even heavier. I'm thinking about what you described, particularly around safer policing. And something that I thought that you did that was really important is when you described it, that we needed to reimagine our infrastructure, we need to reimagine policing. You were clear on not for who, but for all of us. So the parties who would be helping people who are enforcing law, and people who are on the receiving end or who are part of the community, all of those kinds of things. And I'm just curious, because it's not often the way that the narrative is communicated when people are talking about police reform, even though that many people who are in this activist work know that that's what we're talking about. I'm curious if you would elaborate a little bit more on, when you think about the world differently, particularly as it relates to policing, what do you see different? What could we imagine to be different?
Yeah, there are a lot of like different things that I've heard from other people imagined in our public safety system. And, that's kind of what I really encourage that we need, like in my group of people, or when I talk to people, we call it radical imagination. And for some people, that radical imagination is abolition, and they don't imagine a system where any kind of police or any kind of prisons exist, is one way to think about it. And there are people who imagine we keep our systems, but change them around some and reform them. I, as a person, I'm open to what community leaders and like people who are on the ground doing this work like have to say about everything. I never shut a person down based on whether they're an abolitionist or not. I think some of the things that I work on are very much changing the current system that we have. I'm a registered lobbyist in Minnesota. I work for a 501c3, so a nonprofit. I don't, and we don't support particular political parties or, legislation because of political party reasons. We support legislation and support policy that makes better and safer public safety infrastructure. And so a good example of stuff that we can do is banning no-knock warrants. That's a good example of stuff that we can do to reform the current system. No-knock warrants, to the point that you brought up, they're something that we can all get behind because they're just as unsafe for police officers as they are community members. And, the reason why law enforcement ends up shooting unarmed people or, murdering people during no-knock warrants is because they themselves are scared. They can't see anything. They're coming in on surprise. And it's something that we can do to change that, to change public safety infrastructure. So we work on that bill at the Minnesota level and at the federal level. We also recently did an advocacy campaign with the Minnesota Post Board. So the Post Board is the board that decides rules and regulations for police officers in a state. And we just did an advocacy campaign to change the rules of our Post Board. Those rules include things like not allowing people who are white supremacists to be police officers in Minnesota. So like those are some of these things are appear to be things that are self-explanatory or given, but in policy and like government rules, nothing is a given. If you want something, to be changed, you have to explicitly make a policy for it. And so those are some things that we've worked on in the past year that I think will make tangible change for our communities in Minnesota, including changing it, like how and what police officers can and cannot do in our communities.
I appreciate the policy component, because I think as we are grappling with our work around at the HEMAN SWEATT Center around how to impact or create change, how to inspire students, faculty, and staff to be able to look at things and say, this something isn't right here, and then make the next step of how to make change. And so I appreciate that sometimes it doesn't have to be that you are the person that's marching down the street, although that is a component of change. Sometimes it is being a registered lobbyist. Sometimes it is thinking together about policy, because to your point, some things that are very obvious are not so obvious. So sometimes there are people who are in our policing force and our criminal justice experiences that are white supremacists in the way of card carrying, as opposed to white supremacists just in thinking. So
and we had a lot of officers, a lot of people in Minnesota who did not want that rule written down. Like the advocacy campaign took like 8 months because we kept finding pushback. And so I just want to reiterate, like when I say things aren't a given, it's not like we just sent a cute little letter to the post board and was like, hey, explicitly outlaw white supremacists. It was like we had a bunch of people who were like, no, we don't think you should put that in the rules. And we had to fight against that.
And that's, to me, is wild, right? That because and historically, when we think about it, okay, that makes sense, right? Because in many areas, Klan, what we knew as the Klan, now we think of other groups that would be part of the white supremacy group. The Klan, dominated in particular areas, our police force. So I see it, yeah. But that goes back to the point of, we think we're further along, and then there are these moments where you go, oh yeah, I remember in 1953, and all those officers were card-carrying members of the Klan. Well, we're in 2023, and we're still grappling with those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this question. We have been thinking about the work of the HEMAN SWEATT Center and how we can continue to support faculty and staff and students who are interested in trying to do work around what I call social good or social change, social awareness, social justice, all the socials, and to lead change. I'm curious to what characteristics do you think persons need to have in order to be change agents?
Yeah. So first I'll say there's a bunch of different ways to be a change agent, and like what we all have a different role in the movement. So what one person does, isn't what one person does for the movement isn't what you might do for the movement. It's all different. We all depend on each other. We all need each other to do different things. I think some of the most transferable things and characteristics I've seen people have are the ability to be flexible, and to like go with the flow, or be quick on your feet when something happens, and being able to problem solve effectively in short amounts of time. Being an active listener is really important. So, for me, like when we were talking about radical imagination, it's not my job to tell somebody that the way they imagine our public safety infrastructure is incorrect. It's my job to listen to what people want and figure out how to transform that idea into a policy change. Right. And so that's what I do when I actively listen. I think you also have to be brave. Whether or not you could be like in the street, like, having protests and rallying, and like that's really scary. It puts you at like physical and legal danger. But also like, you know, putting on a suit and going into the Capitol and talking to like the most hard on crime politician that you can, who like can pinpoint you by face and can, you know, tell other people not to hire you or not to talk to you or, you know, hurt your professional or personal career in some capacity is also kind of nerve wracking and dangerous. Like it's dangerous in different ways. And so you just need to be brave. Um, and, you know, bravery also, you're going to like be, you could possibly be talking to people like in government who aren't very nice, who think less of you, who, you know, whatever. And if you're a person who's advocating on the behalf of your community, on the behalf of someone else, or like you're trying to lead a movement, you have to be brave and face that. And other than that, I would say kind. Like there are a lot of people in this world who actually are just not kind people, and it shows. And I've not met a single person who does movement work who is not a kind person. Because it doesn't match to be a mean person, right? And work for your community. So like being kind, and then not being nice. Being nice and being kind are different. Being a kind-hearted person, who you are a kind person, not because it's polite or because it's a pleasantry, but it's because that's actually how you feel about yourself and feel about the community you serve.
I like everything that you said, but I appreciate even additionally the kind component, because I think in this work one has to be kind to others, but also one has to be kind to oneself because it is a lot to bear. And yesterday, some of us had a conversation about good trouble, John Lewis, and using his frame from the book and so forth, and thinking about what you said about being kind, um, what it meant for him. And if you've not read that book, take a moment and read through and really understand John Lewis and understand what other people, particularly of the civil rights movement, what I call gave up, right? Because there's this moment where when you think about all the people who are in what we call activism work, whether it's people who are on the front end or people that who we know the names that we can call or the names we cannot call, there were hundreds of people who were involved in making change in this world, and particularly as we celebrate Black History Month, making change so that Black folks could have an experience that was very different than the ancestors, persons before them. And so, in thinking about that language of kind, I'm thinking about good trouble, and thinking about persons like John Lewis, who I believe had to be kind in a very unique way. And so, thinking about what you're saying about being kind in a unique way, because you have to be able to see the world, even though at that moment it is not a just world. It's not a world where um, people are cruel. When I think about the dogs and I think about the ways in which lynchings and things like that, the violence that was performed and is still performed through other forms as a way of intimidating folks from doing things, and to still wake up every morning and be able to come and keep trying to make change. I believe you have to be, to what you said, kind, because you have to be able to consistently see that the world can be different. And that's incredibly hard when you're faced with um, a reality that says the world is a very bad place. So I appreciate that kind statement. Um, when you are talking to new people about what you do, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, like, what does that day to day look like, and then a little bit more about the one issue you kind of got into it, but um, that issue that just you are until you're ride or die until.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my job is not polite conversation. When it gets brought up, like when I'm meeting people for the first time, either it makes them uncomfortable and they switch topics really quickly, or they're obsessed and they want to talk about it forever. So it kind of has that vibe to it. So I'll give my pitch from the beginning. I work at a nonprofit called the Center for Victims of Torture. I lead and manage our healing, incarceration, and policing program. CVT was founded in the 1980s to provide rehabilitative services to people who have experienced torture, inhumane, and degrading treatment in other countries. We also do educational training, research, and policy advocacy, which is where you'll find me. We're headquartered in St. Paul, but we have offices in other places in Minnesota, DC, Georgia, Arizona, and the Middle East and Africa. And what makes my program really unique at CVT is that previously we were an international facing only organization. Mm-hmm. So the people we worked with had experienced torture in other places in the world and then would receive services at our clinics. But my program, which is HIP for short, the HIP program is the first program that focuses on brown and Black people in the United States who have experienced abuse, torture, or violence by our police departments or our criminal legal system infrastructure. And so my job is on the day-to-day is kind of divided into maybe like 4 different categories. I have like managerial administrative roles. So, I'm the person that manages this. I develop it. I decide where we're going. I have a very like directorial role in that regard. So I deal with budget and I deal with hiring on people and, thinking about our policy choices in that regard. Next is like active lobbying. So you can find me at the Capitol in St. Paul doing meetings with legislators. I might be testifying in front of the House or the Senate on certain bills. And I'll be actively lobbying on a variety of legislation. And then you'll heavily find me doing community engagement work. So I'll be out at, community education programs. I'll be out, helping families of people who have been stolen by police. We'll do visuals for them. I'll show up and like support as much as possible. We do press conferences to let people know what's going on. We host community education events sometimes. And yeah, so that's what my job looks like on the day-to-day. It's a lot of meeting people out where they are. It's a lot of helping wherever I can. And it's a lot of putting on blazers and going to the St. Paul Capitol and talking to people.
As we prepare for, if there's any questions, if folks have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat and we can answer those questions. But as we prepare to do that, I wanted to ask the question around the addition of of domestic focus on violence and other experiences that folks, Black and brown folks, have experienced here in this country. What made you all decide to create that component?
Yeah, that's a good question and a question we get a lot. So this conversation had happened internally at CVT for many years, and it would ebb and flow, go back and forth every time there was a high-profile police-inflicted murder in the Twin Cities. And so, we have a history of a lot of them in the Twin Cities. So, I think at this point, everyone will know about George Floyd, but we also have Philando Castile, Jamar Clark, and Hardell Sherrill, and the list is hundreds long. Hundreds. Over 100 people are murdered in the state of Minnesota every year by our police force. And so that, like, when you think about it, like, that's hundreds of families who are affected by these issues. And people at CVT had always convinced themselves not to do it. Maybe they felt like it wasn't their place. They're an international facing organization. And then George Floyd was literally tortured to death on camera. Mm-hmm. And we all saw it. And if that doesn't fall within the Center for Victims of Torture's kind of mission and mandate, then what does, right? And so it was that, and especially like the Twin Cities is our headquarters. It's where we were founded. It's been our home. It's like it's a community that we benefit from. We service people in these communities that are migrants. We have a really large like refugee and immigrant population in the Twin Cities. And so it was definitely also about giving back. And so that's when they decided to create my program. I'm the first person to be hired on in this program. So since November of 2021, I've been the person who's like basically created it from the ground up. So the program exists as what I designed and implemented it to be. So
Question around that. Thank you for that. Question around that. Do you think that people can't see their own issues? Hold on. Hold on. That moment when something hits you in the back of your throat. Sorry. When you were kind of describing that how you all were able to get to the point of the program, it sparked for me, and I was trying to get it out before I started choking, so that's why I said it all kind of clumsily, but it sparked for me the idea that oftentimes we can see injustice, we can see isms in other countries, but the idea that we hadn't made the connection that what we were experiencing here is similar. And I don't want to just do Apple, do that kind of, well, my experience is this and it's worse than yours. I'm not doing that. But wondering how, because of it's our experience, that oftentimes we're not able to see, hey, it's the same, in the sense
Yeah.
of it's the same action. And do you feel like you get a lot of that?
Yeah, I mean, that is entirely right now like a conversation that we as a human rights community are having. Like, so much of particularly the West participating in human rights is like an imperialism, colonial, white supremacist standpoint, which is like human rights violations happen in those places, those other places. And normally other places are where Black and brown people live. Black and brown Indigenous people of color live. And for decades, places like the United States has gotten away with being a wealthy country that participates in stuff like the UN, that participates in like global economic funds and helps bail out other countries and assists in other people's wars and whatever, without having to take any kind of consequence or reflection about what we do internally. And that's exactly how, the United States government prefers it. The United States has a long history of like wanting to be involved in other countries' issues and, provide help or provide our opinion or put sanctions down or whatever it is. But as soon as anyone turns inward to look at what we do to Black, brown, Indigenous people of color, then it's, like, mind your business, stay in your own lane, right? And so that's something that like human rights organizations are reckoning with. It's actually not too common for human rights organizations to work on US-based issues. Really previously, it was just the really big ones like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch. It's very rare for a smaller human rights organization like CBT to take on something like this, but it's important. Like when we don't focus on human rights violations that are happening in specific countries just because it's a wealthy country or just because it's a predominantly white country, like whatever it is, it just erases the hardship that those people are going through when like if it was happening somewhere else, people might care more. And it's always really interesting because there is a lot of privilege in being an American in comparison to living in other places as an American. When you travel to other places, even, it means a lot to people that you hold an American passport. So we have to be mindful of that global privilege. Even if you're not a white American, if you're American, you still hold some American privilege. But then internally in the United States, when, like many of us are American, we all hold American passports. Those discrepancies and biases come into play. And not everyone in America lives the same American life, which, because we've isolated ourselves and the US has hidden that from a lot of the global community, a lot of people around the world don't even know. They literally don't know that there are various different kinds of America. They think we all live in the very white, sitcom kind of America. When I went to Greece, I had students who thought I was lying about being American. They did not know that Americans could be Black. They thought I was lying about being from Africa and that I was embarrassed. And so we've always been here. We've been traveling globally since you could travel globally, right? We've always been around, but our histories have been intentionally hidden. And so the last thing I'll say is everything is different, where you go country by country, but please do not let anybody lie to you and tell you that America is not in a crisis when it comes to our policing and incarceration structures. We have some of the most disparaging statistics when it comes to policing and incarceration. We have a massive incarcerated population that is more than the world's population of incarcerated people. And one thing I can say is the US, Brazil, and Nigeria, and maybe some other countries, you might not think they have much in comparison, off top of your head, but what we can all know is, we all live under systems of inhumane policing in those countries. So the issues that are happening in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, they might be different, and it might be a spectrum. Some might be worse than others, but it's all a blanket of we live in public safety infrastructure that's failing us.
I'm going to allow you to close there because I could go on and on and on. As I shared in my text with you, it's like an old conversation. And for me, this has been such a significant conversation. Ms. Kennedy, I'd like to see if you have a question because you've been quiet. So I want to make sure if you have a question, you get to ask the last question.
The question that I have is a moment that you realized that change in the world and not really but it still feels small to somebody else.
I think you cut out some. I think I heard the question. Did you ask me the moment I knew I was changing the world, and what would I say to someone who would feel small? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing, I don't really, sometimes it's hard to feel oh, you're changing the world. That feels really big. But I have done a lot of things that I'm proud of. I've done work that has directly affected community and people. I've done small campaigns that, changed a couple things at Wiley. I helped get the mental health center at Wiley open. And, I've done some stuff that's community wise. And then in this job, at for CVT, I've been involved in massive pieces of legislation that have passed. And so, for example, a few days ago, we just passed Restore the Vote in Minnesota. So that gives 55,000 plus Minnesotans the ability to vote after they're released from incarceration that previously wouldn't have had it. And so that means a lot of Black and brown people will now get to vote when they hadn't before. And so I think it's exciting. It makes me feel like I chose the right path for me. And I guess it gives me fire. Like you were saying, it's really hard sometimes to wake up when there's a lot of things we have to fix and it can be tiring. But I do the work I do not to create a better future for myself, but to create a better future for the people that come after me, just like my ancestors did for me. And so what I would say to other people is like, we are small. Like I am small, you are small, because the universe is massive and there's 7 billion people on this planet. And like, but that's like the beauty of it. If 7 billion people do their own thing and don't work as a community, nothing changes and we end up fighting each other. But if 7 billion people unify, that's a massive movement. And so like, you are small, we are small, but we work together as a collective, and like your voice as one person has the ability to make connections, to build community, and like what you choose to do with your career matters. And so whether or not you choose to go into advocacy, or you do accounting, or you do whatever, you don't have to stop being a person that strives for social change. Like you have the opportunity to make social good and make social change wherever you go.
Well, I can't express enough gratitude for this conversation. People have put it in the chat. Miss Jackson, Miss Wanda Jackson, she said she's proud of your accomplishments.
Thank you.
Former Wiley College Student Support Services peer tutor. Dr. Andrus said, congratulations, we're proud of you. The Reverend Dean Duffy said, such a rich conversation. And so we will close at that, because it absolutely has been. Thank you for coming back virtually to us and just talking with us and sharing with us, because you are a product of Wiley College, but we are also continuing to support you. I just have to share, when I came here, I've only been here, this is going into the end of, started almost my second year. And everyone talked about you, about our Fulbright scholar. And so I said, well, we have to talk to her. So I'm glad that you allowed for me to be the person that had some conversation with you as well. So thank you so much. Asia Harper, who is one of our HEMAN SWEATT scholars, says, thank you so much. Basil says, this was a great conversation. Ms. Antoinette Thomas says, thank you. Miss Johnson says hello, and she dittos others and congratulations. Miss Johnson says congratulations, Francis Johnson. So I don't know if you can see him. I just want to make sure you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. I'll say, like, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I've been like a person who's been happy to come back to Wiley or talk to students or faculty individually about stuff. So I'm on LinkedIn. You can also shoot me an email at CVT. I'm THILL@CVT.org. So thill@CVT.org. And, go forth inspired, y'all. You got this. And I'm proud of y'all, just like you're proud of me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you. Everyone have a good rest of your day.